Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be reading Southern Horrors Lynch Law in All Its Phases by Ida B. Wells.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
Greetings, forecast. Thanks for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. I want to say greetings to Sister Raw and the elders that listen with her, Anthony McPhail, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, the Oni from the Pro-Black Perspective. I want to say greetings to Bwana Haguziki, Brother Bakari, and Afro Native, and anyone else that's listening. I thank each and every one of you for being out there. Preface. The greater part of what is contained in these pages was published in the New York Age, June 25, 1892, in explanation of the editorial which the Memphis whites considered sufficiently infamous to justify the destruction of my paper, The Free Speech. Since the appearance of that statement, requests have come from all parts of the country that Exiled, the name under which it then appeared, be issued in pamphlet form. Some donations were made, but not enough for that purpose. The noble effort of the ladies of the New York and Brooklyn October 5th have enabled me to comply with this request and give the world a true, unvarnished account of the causes of lynch law in the South. This statement is not a shield for the despoiler of virtue, nor altogether a defense for the poor, blind Afro-American Samsons who suffer themselves to be betrayed by the white Delilahs. It is a contribution of truth to an array of facts, the perusal of which it is hoped will stimulate this great American republic to demand that justice be done though the heavens fall. It is with no pleasure I have dipped my hands in the corruption here exposed. Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen upon me to do so. The awful death toll that Judge Lynch is calling every week is appalling, not only because of the lives it takes, the rank cruelty and outrage to the victims, but because of the prejudice it fosters and the stain it places against the good name of a weak race. The Afro-American is not a bestial race. If this work can contribute in any way towards proving this, and at the same time arouse the conscience of the American people to demand for justice to every citizen and punishment by law for the lawless, I shall feel I have done my race a service. Other considerations are of minor importance. Ida B. Wells, New York City, October 16th, 1892. Greetings, KW Don 7. To the Afro-American women of New York and Brooklyn, whose race love, earnest zeal, and unselfish effort at Lyric Hall in the city of New York on the night of October 5th, 1892, made possible this publication, in this pamphlet, is gratefully dedicated by the author. Honorable Frederick Douglass's letter. Dear Miss Wells, let me give you thanks for your faithful paper on the Lynch abomination now generally practiced against the colored people in the South. There has been no word equal to it in convincing power. I have spoken, but my word is feeble in comparison. You give us what you know and testify from actual knowledge. You have dealt with the facts with cool, painstakingly fidelity and left those naked and uncontradicted facts to speak for themselves. Brave woman, you have done your people and mine a great service which can neither be weighed nor measured. If American conscience were only half alive, if the American church and clergy were only half Christianized, if American sensibility were not hardened by the persistent infliction of outrage and crime against colored people, a scream of terror, shame, and indignation would rise to heaven wherever your pamphlet shall be read. But alas, even crime has power to reproduce itself and create conditions favorable to its own existence. It sometimes seems we are deserted by earth and heaven, yet we must still think, speak, and work, and trust the power of a merciful God for final deliverance. Very truly and gratefully yours, Frederick Douglass, Cedar Hill, Anacostia, D.C., October 25th, 1892. The offense. The evening of May 24th, 1892, the city of Memphis was filled with excitement. Editorials in the daily papers of that date caused a meeting to be held in the Cotton Exchange building. A committee was sent for with the editors of the Free Speech, an Afro-American journal published for that city. And the only reason for the open threats of lynching that were made were not carried out was because they could not be found. The cause of this commotion was the following editorial published in the Free Speech, May 21st, 1892, that Saturday previous. 8 Negroes lynched, last issue of the Free Speech, one at Little Rock, Arkansas, last Saturday morning, where the citizens broke into the penitentiary and got their man. 3 near Anniston, Alabama, 1 near New Orleans, and 3 in Clarksville, Georgia. The last 3 for killing a white man and 5 on the same old racket. The new alarm about raping white women. The same program of hanging, then shooting bullets into the lifeless bodies was carried out to the letter. Nobody in this section of the country believes the old threadbare lie that Negro men rape white women. If Southern white men are not careful, they will overreach themselves and public sentiment will have a reaction. A conclusion will then be reached, which will be very damaging to the moral reputation of their women. The daily commercial of Wednesday following, May 25th, contained the following leader. These Negroes who are attempting to make the lynching of individuals of their race a means for arousing the worst passions of their kind are playing with a dangerous sentiment. The Negroes may as well understand that there is no mercy for the Negro rapist and little patience with his defenders. A Negro organ printed in this city in a recent issue publishes the following atrocious paragraph. Quote, nobody in this section of the country believes the old threadbare lie that Negro men rape white women. If Southern white men are not careful, they will overreach themselves, and the public sentiment will have a reaction and a conclusion will be reached, which will be very damaging to the moral reputation of their women. The fact that a black scoundrel is allowed to live and utter such loathsome and repulsive calamities is a volume of evidence as to the wonderful patience of Southern whites, but we have had enough of it. There are some things that the Southern white man will not tolerate, and the obscene intimations of the foregoing have brought the writer to the very outermost limit of public patience. We hope we have said enough. The Evening Scimitar of the same date copied the commercial's editorial with these words of comment. Patience under such circumstances is not a virtue. If the Negroes themselves do not apply the remedy without delay, it will be a duty, it will be the duty of those whom he has attacked to tie the wretch who utters these calumnies to a stake at the intersection of Main and Madison Streets, brand him in the forehead with a hot iron, and perform upon him a surgical operation with a pair of tailor's shears. So they wanted this person totally maimed by his community. Acting upon this advice, the leading citizens met in the Cotton Exchange building the same evening, and the threats of lynching were freely indulged, but not by the lawless element upon which the deviltry of the South is usually saddled, but by the leading businessmen in the leading business center. Mr. Fleming, the business manager and owning half interest in the free speech, had to leave town to escape the mob and was afterwards ordered not to return. Letters and telegrams sent me in New York, where I was spending my vacation, advised me that bodily harm awaited my return. Creditors took possession of the office and sold the outfit, and the free speech was as if it had never been. So they totally shut her down. The editorial in question was prompted by the many inhuman and fiendish lynchings of Afro Americans which have recently taken place and was meant as a warning. 8 lynched in 1 week and 5 of them charged with rape. The thinking public will not easily believe freedom and education more brutalizing than slavery, and the world knows that the crime of rape was unknown during 4 years of civil war when white women of the South were at the mercy of the race, which all at once charged with being a bestial one. Since my business has been destroyed and I am in exile from home because of that editorial, the issue has been forced. And as a writer of it, I feel that the race and the public generally should have a statement of the facts as they exist. They will serve at the same time as a defense for the Afro Americans, Samsons, who suffered themselves to be betrayed by white Delilahs. The whites of Montgomery, Alabama knew J.C. Duke sounded the keynote of that situation, which they would gladly hide from the world, when he said in his paper, The Herald, 5 years ago, why is it that white women attract Negro men far more than in former days? There was a time when such a thing was unheard of. There is a secret to this thing, and we greatly suspect it is the growing appreciation of white Juliets for colored Romeos. Mr. Duke, like the free speech's proprietors, was forced to leave the city for reflecting the honor of white women and his paper suppressed. But the truth remains that Afro American men do not always rape white women without their consent. Mr. Duke, before leaving Montgomery, signed a card disclaiming any intention of slandering Southern white women. The editor of the Free Speech has no disclaimer to enter, but asserts instead that there are many white women in the South who would marry colored men if such an act would not place them at once beyond the pale of society within the clutches of the law. The miscegenation laws of the South only operate against the legitimate union of the races. They leave the white man free to seduce all the colored girls he can, but it is death to the colored man who yields to the force and advances of a similar attraction to white women. White men lynch the offending Afro American, but not because he is a despoiler of virtue, but because he succumbs to the smiles of white women. Chapter 2: The Black and White of It. Greetings, Brother Bakari. How are you this evening? The Cleveland Gazette of January 16, 1892, publishes a case in point. Mrs. J.S. Underwood, the wife of a minister of Elmira, Ohio, accused an Afro American of rape. She told her husband that during his absence in 1888, stumping the state for the Prohibition Party, the man came to the kitchen door, forced his way into the house, and insulted her. She tried to drive him out with a heavy poker, but he overpowered and chloroformed her. And when she was revived, her clothing was torn and she was in a horrible condition. So he smashed. She did not know the man, but could only identify him. She pointed out William Offett, a married man who was arrested and, being in Ohio, was granted a trial. The prisoner vehemently denied the charge of rape, but confessed when he went to Mrs. Underwood's residence at her invitation and was criminally intimate with her at her request. This availed him nothing against the sworn testimony of a minister's wife, a lady of the highest respectability. He was found guilty and entered the penitentiary December 14th, 1888, for 15 years, and they are still doing this to this very day. Sometime afterwards, the woman's remorse led her to confess to her husband that the man was innocent. But he got 15 years for submitting to her seduction of him. These are her words. I met Offit at the post office. It was raining. He was polite to me, and as I had several bundles in my arms, he offered to carry them home for me, which he did. He had a strange fascination for me, and I invited him to call on me. He called, bringing chestnuts and candy for the children. So that's all she cost, was a few chestnuts and some candy for her kids. By this means, we got them to leave us alone in the room. Then I sat on his lap. He made a proposal to me and I readily consented. Why I did so, I do not know, but that I did is true. He visited me several times after that, and each time I was indiscreet. I did not care after the first time. In fact, I could not have resisted and had no desire to resist. So she wanted it the whole time. When asked by her husband why she told him she had been outraged, she said, I had several reasons for telling you. One was the neighbors saw the fellow there. Another was I was afraid I had contracted a loathsome disease. And still another was that I feared I might give birth to a Negro baby. I hope to save my reputation by telling you a deliberate lie. Her husband, horrified by the confession, had offered, who had already served 4 years, released, and secured a divorce. There are thousands of such cases throughout the South, with the difference that the Southern white men insatiate fury wreak their vengeance without intervention of law upon Afro Americans who consort with their women. A few instances to substantiate the assertion that some white women love the company of the Afro American will not be out of place. Most of these cases were reported by daily papers of the South. In the winter of 1885 to 1886, the wife of a practicing physician in Memphis, in good social standing, whose name has escaped me, left home, husband, and children and ran away with her black coachman. She was with him a month before the husband found and brought her home. The coachman could not be found. The doctor moved his family away from Memphis and is living in another city under an assumed name. So she left everything to be with her BBC, her big black beep. In the same city last year, a white girl in the dusk of evening screamed at the approach of some of the parties that a Negro had assaulted her in the street. He was captured, tried by a white judge and jury that acquitted him of the charge. It is needless to add, if there had been a scrap of evidence on which to convict him of so grave a charge, he would have been convicted. Sarah Clark of Memphis loved a black man and lived openly with him. When she was indicted last spring for miscegenation, she swore in court that she was not a white woman. This she did to escape the penitentiary and continued her illicit relation undisturbed. That she is of the lower class of whites does not disturb the fact that she is a white woman. The leading citizens of Memphis are defending the honor of all white women, Demi-Monde included. Since the manager of the Free Speech has been run away from Memphis by guardians of the honor of Southern white women, a young girl living on Poplar Street who was discovered in intimate relations with a handsome mulatto colored young man, Will Morgan by name, stole her father's money to send the young fellow away from that father's wrath. She has since joined him in Chicago. So she stole from her daddy to give money to her mulatto lover. The Memphis Ledger for June 8th has said the following. If Lily Bailey, a rather pretty white girl of 17 years of age, who is now at the city hospital, would be somewhat less reserved about her disgrace, there would be some very nauseating details in the story of her life. She is the mother of a little coon. The truth might reveal fearful depravity, or it might reveal the evidence of a rank outrage. She will not divulge the name of the man who has left such black evidence of her disgrace, and in fact says it is a matter in which there can be no interest to the outside world. She came to Memphis nearly 3 months ago and was taken in at the Women's Refuge in the southern part of the city. She remained there until a few weeks ago when the child was born. The ladies in charge of the refuge were horrified. The girl was at once sent to the city hospital where she has been since May 30th. She is a country girl. She came to Memphis from her father's farm, a short distance from Hernando, Mississippi. Just when she left there, she would not say. In fact, she says she came to Memphis from Arkansas and says her home is in that state. She is rather good looking, has blue eyes, a low forehead, and dark red hair. The ladies of the Women's Refuge do not know anything about the girl further than what they learned when she was an inmate of their institution, and she would not tell much. When the child was born, an attempt was made to get the girl to reveal the name of the Negro who disgraced her. She obstinately refused, and it was impossible to elicit any information from her on the subject. Note the wording. The truth might reveal fearful depravity or rank outrage. If it had been a little white child, or Lily Bailey had a pitiful story of Negro outrage, it would have been a case of a woman's weakness or assault, and she could have remained at the women's refuge. But a Negro child, and to withhold the father's name and thus prevent the killing of another Negro quote unquote rapist, was a case of fearful depravity. The very weak the very weak of leading citizens of Memphis were making a spectacle of themselves in defense of all white women of every kind. An Afro American, M. Strickland, was found in a white woman's room in the city. Although she made no outcry of rape, he was jailed and would have been lynched, but the woman stated she bought curtains from him, for he was a furniture dealer, and his business in her room that night was to put them up. The white woman's word was taken as absolutely in this case as when the cry of rape is made, and he was freed. What is true of Memphis is true of the entire South. The daily papers last year reported a farmer's wife in Alabama had given birth to a Negro child. When the Negro farmhand who was plowing the field heard it, he took the mule from the plow and fled. The dispatchers also told of a woman in South Carolina who gave birth to a Negro child and charged 3 men with being its father, every one of whom has since disappeared. In Tecumseh, Alabama, the colored boy who was lynched there last year for assaulting a white girl told her before his accusers that he had met her there in the woods often before. Frank Weems of Chattanooga, who was not lynched in May only because the prominent citizens became his bodyguard until the doors of the penitentiary closed around him, had letters in his pockets from the white woman in the case making the appointment with him. Edward Coy, who was burned alive in Texarkana, January 1st, 1892, died protesting his innocence. Investigation since, as given by the bystander in the Chicago Inter-Ocean October 1, proves that 1. The woman who was paraded as a victim of violence was of bad character. Her husband was a drunkard and a gambler. 2. She was publicly reported and generally known to have been criminally intimate with Coy for more than a year previous. 3. She was compelled by threats, if not by violence, to make the charge against the victim. 4. When she came to apply to match, Coy asked her if she would burn him after they had been sweethearting so long. And 5. A large majority of the superior white men prominent in the affair are the reputed fathers of mulatto children. These are not pleasant facts, but they are illustrative of the vital phase of the so called race question, which should be properly designated an earnest inquiry as to the best methods by which religion, science, law, and political power may be employed to excuse injustice, barbarity, and crime done to a people because of race and color. There can be no possible belief that these people were inspired by a consuming zeal to vindicate God's law against miscegenationists of the most practical sort. The woman was a willing partner in the victim's guilt, and being of the superior race must naturally have been more guilty. In Natchez, Mississippi, Mrs. Marshall of the creme de la creme, one of the creme de la creme in the city, created a tremendous sensation several years ago. She had a black coachman who was married and had been in her employ for several years. During this time, she gave birth to a child whose color was remarked but traced to some brunette ancestor, and one of the fashionable dames of the city was its godmother. Mrs. Marshall's social position was unquestioned, and wealth showered every dainty on this child, which was idolized by its brothers and sisters and by its white papa. In course of time, another child appeared on the scene, but it was unmistakably dark. All were alarmed, and the rush of blood strangulation were the conjectures, but the doctor, when asked the cause, grimly told them it was a Negro child. There was a family conclave. The coachman heard of it and, leaving his own family, went west and has never returned. As soon as Mrs. Marshall was able to travel, she was sent away in deep disgrace. Her husband died within 1 year of a broken heart. So she was having babies by that black man the whole time. Ebenezer Fowler, the wealthiest colored man in Issaquah County, Mississippi, was shot down on the street in Mayersville on January 30th, 1885, just before dark by an armed body of white men who filled his body with bullets. They charged him with writing a note to a white woman of the place, which they intercepted and which proved that there was an intimacy existing between them. So he was a rich black man that they were jealous of, and they planted evidence on him just because they wanted him dead, because they hated him. They were jealous of him. Hundreds of such cases might be cited, but enough have been given to prove the assertion that there are white women in the South who love Afro Americans' company, even as They are white men. There are white men notorious for their preference of Afro American women. Is there hardly a town in the South which has not an instance of the kind of which is well known, and hence the assertion is reiterated that nobody in the South believes the old threadbare lie that Negro men rape white women? Hence, there is a growing demand among Afro Americans that the guilt or innocence of parties accused of rape be fully established. They know the men of this section of the country who refuse this are not so desirous of punishing rapists as they pretend. The utterances of the leading white men show that with them it is not the crime but the class. Bishop Fitzgerald has become apologist for lynchers of the rapists of white women only. Governor Tillman of South Carolina in the month of June, standing under the tree of Barnell in Barnell, South Carolina, on which 8 Afro Americans were hung last year, declared that he would, quote unquote, lead a mob to lynch a Negro who raped a white woman. So say the pulpits, officials, and newspapers of the South. But when the victim is a colored woman, it is different. Last winter in Baltimore, Maryland, 3 white ruffians assaulted a Miss Camphor, a young Afro American girl, while out walking with a young man of her own race. She was with her black man of her own race. They held her escort and outraged the girl. That means they raped her. It was a deed It was a deed dastardly enough to arouse Southern blood, which gives its horror of rape an excuse for lawlessness. But she was an Afro American. The case went to the courts. An Afro American lawyer defended the men and they were acquitted. So they will use one of us to tear down all of us. In Nashville, Tennessee, there was a white man named Pat Hanafan who outraged a little Afro American girl. And from the physical injuries she received, she has been ruined for life. He was jailed for 6 months, discharged, and is now a detective in that city. In the same state, last May, a white man outraged a little Afro American girl in a drugstore. He was arrested and released on bail at the trial. It is rumored that 500 Afro Americans had organized to lynch him. 250 white citizens armed themselves with Winchesters and guarded him. A cannon was placed in front of his home, and the Buchanan rifles, which are held by the state militia, ordered to the scene for his protection. The Afro American mob did not materialize. Only 2 weeks before, if Ephesians Grizzard, who only had been charged with the rape of a white woman, had been taken from the jail with Governor Buchanan and the police and the militia standing by, dragged through the streets in broad daylight, knives plunged into him at every step, and with every fiendish cruelty a frenzied mob could devise, he was at last swung out on the bridge with hands cut to pieces as he tried to climb up the stanchions. A naked, bloody example of the bloodthirstiness of the 19th century civilization of Athens of the South. No cannon or military was called out to his defense. because he dared to visit a white woman. Forecast is surprised that they had black lawyers at that time. Yes, they had black lawyers at that time. Black lawyers were always a thing. There was always an educated elite. Now, they might have been calling a mulatto black or colored or Afro American, but yes, they had black lawyers even at that time. At the very moment these civilized whites were announcing their determination to protect their wives and daughters by murdering Grizzard, a white man was in the same jail for raping 8-year-old Maggie Reese, an Afro American girl. He was not harmed. The honor of grown women who were glad enough to be supported by the Grizzard boys and Ed Coy, as long as the liaison was not known, needed protection. They were white. The outrage upon helpless childhood needed no avenging in this case. She was black. A white man in Guthrie, Oklahoma territory 2 months ago inflicted such injuries upon another Afro American child that she died. He was not punished, but an attempt was made in the same town in the month of June to lynch an Afro American who simply visited a white woman. In Memphis, Tennessee, this in the month of June, Ellerton L. Dorr, who is the husband of Russell Hancock's widow, was arrested for attempted rape of Mattie Cole, a neighbor's cook. He was only prevented from accomplishing this purpose by the appearance of Mattie's employer. Dorr's friends say that he was drunk and not responsible for his actions. The grand jury refused to indict him and he was discharged. So they have a long, long history of crying rape when rape didn't happen. And they have a long, 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 and even longer history of ignoring Black women when they are raped, even if they are children. One man raped a little girl to death and nothing happened to him. Chapter 3, The New Cry. The appeal of Southern whites to the Northern sympathy and sanction, the adroit, insidious plea made by Bishop Fitzgerald from suspension of judgment because those who condemn lynchings express no sympathy for the white woman in the case, falls to the ground in the light of the foregoing. From this exposition of the race issue in lynch law, the whole matter is explained by the well-known opposition growing out of slavery to the progress of the race. This is crystallized in the oft-repeated slogan, "This is a white man's country and the white man must rule." So that is not a new idea. That is a very old idea. The South resented giving the Afro American his freedom, the ballot box, and the civil rights law. The raids of the Ku Klux and white liners to subvert Reconstruction government, the Hamburg and Ellerton, South Carolina, the Copiah County, Mississippi, and the Lafayette Parish, Louisiana massacres were executed as the natural resentment of intelligence against government by ignorance. Honest white men practically conceded the necessity of intelligence murdering ignorance to correct the mistake of the general government, and the race was left to the tender mercies of the solid South. Thoughtful Afro Americans with the strong arm of the government withdrawn and with the hope to stop such wholesale massacres urged the race to sacrifice its political rights for the sake of peace. They honestly believed the race should fit itself for government, and when that should be done, the objection to race participation in politics would be removed. But the sacrifice did not remove the trouble, nor move the South to justice. One by one, the Southern states have legally disenfranchised the Afro American. And since the repeal of the Civil Rights Bill, nearly every Southern state has passed separate car laws with a penalty against their infringement. The race, regardless of advancement, is pinned into filthy, stifling partitions cut off from smoking cars. All this while, although the political cause has been removed, the butcheries of the Black men of Barnesville, South Carolina, Carlton, Mississippi, Waycross, Georgia, and Memphis, Tennessee have gone on. So the flaying alive of a man in Kentucky, the burning of one in Arkansas, the hanging of a 15-year-old girl in Louisiana, a woman in Jackson, Tennessee, and one in Hollandale, Mississippi, until the dark and bloody record of the South shows 728 Afro Americans lynched during the past 8 years. Not 50 of these were for political causes. The rest were for all manner of accusations, from that of rape of white women to the case of the boy Will Lewis, who was hanged in Tullahoma, Tennessee last year for being drunk and quote unquote sassy to white folks. So they was just killing and lynching people for anything. And now they use the police department to carry out their state murders, their state sanctioned murders. These statistics compiled with by the Chicago Tribune were given the first of this year, 1892. Since then, not less than 150 have been known to have met violent deaths at the hands of cruel, bloodthirsty mobs during the past 9 months. To palliate this record, which grows worse as the Afro American becomes intelligent. Did you hear that? The lynchings become worse as the Afro American becomes more intelligent. An excuse from the most heinous crimes that ever stained the history of a country, the South is shielding itself behind the plausible screen of defending the honor of its women. This, too, in the face of the fact that only 1/3 of the 728 victims to mobs have been actually charged with rape, to say nothing of those that 1/3 who were innocent of the charge. A white correspondent of the Baltimore Sun declares that the Afro American who was lynched in Chesterwood, Maryland in May for assault on a white girl was innocent, that the deed was done by a white man who has since disappeared. The girl herself maintained that her assailant was a white man. When the poor Afro American was murdered, the whites excused their refusal of a trial on the ground that they wished to spare the white girl the mortification of having to testify in court. This cry has had its effect. It was closed, it has closed the heart, stifled the conscience, warped the judgment, and hushed the voice of the press and the pulpit on the subject of lynch law throughout this land of liberty. Men who stand high in the esteem of the public for Christian character, for moral and physical courage, for devotion to the principles of equal and exact justice to all, and for great sagacity, stand as cowards who fear to open their mouths before this great outrage. They do not see that by their tacit encouragement, their silent acquiescence, the black shadow of lawlessness in the form of lynch law is spreading its wings over the whole country. Men who, like Governor Tillman, start the ball of a lynch law rolling for a certain crime are powerless to stop when the drunken criminal, white toughs, feel like hanging an Afro American on any pretext. Even to the better class of Afro Americans, the crime of rape is so revolting that they too often have taken the white man's word and given lynch law neither the investigation nor the condemnation that it deserved. Did you hear that? High class black people were lynching black people or turning over black people to lynch mobs because they have too often taken the white man's word and they didn't investigate or condemn it either. They forget that a concession of the right to lynch a man for a certain crime not only concedes the right to lynch any person for any crime, but so frequently is the cry of rape now raised, it is in a fair way to stamp us a race of rapists and desperados. They have gone on hoping and believing that general education and financial strength could solve the difficulty and are devoting all their energies to the accumulation of both. The mob spirit has grown with the increasing intelligence of the Afro American. It has left the out of the way places where ignorance prevails, has thrown off the mask which with which this new cry stalls in broad daylight in large cities, the centers of civilization, and is encouraged by the leading citizens and the press. Forecast says exactly. Upper class Negroes justify it, and she calling all black people out for being too scared to speak. Exactly. Exactly. Chapter 4: The Malicious and Untruthful White Press. The Daily Commercial and the Evening Scimitar of Memphis, Tennessee are owned by leading businessmen of that city. And yet, in spite of the fact that there had been no white woman in Memphis outraged by an Afro American, and that Memphis possessed a thrifty, law abiding, property owning class of Afro Americans, the commercial of May 17th, under the head More Rapes, More Lynchings, gave utterance to the following: the lynching of three Negro scoundrels reported in our dispatches from Anniston, Alabama, for a brutal outrage committed upon a white woman will be a text for much comment on Southern barbarism by Northern newspapers. But we fancy it will hardly prove effective for campaign purposes among intelligent people. The frequency of these lynchings calls attention to the frequency of the crimes which causes lynching. The Southern barbarism, which deserves the serious attention of all people, North and South, is the barbarism which preys upon weak and defenseless women, but they're only talking about white women because, as we've seen, the evidence shows in this article earlier, when it's black women, when it's black little girls who actually are weak and defenseless and not complicit seducting and seducing white women, they don't care. Nothing but the most prompt, speedy, and extreme punishment can hold in check the horrible and bestial propensities of the Negro race. There is a strange similarity about the number of cases of this character which have lately occurred. In each case, the crime was deliberately planned and perpetuated by several Negroes. They watched for an opportunity when the women were left without a protector. It was not a sudden yielding to a fit of passion, but the consummation of a devilish purpose which has been seeking and waiting for the opportunity. This feature of the crime not only makes it the most fiendishly brutal, but adds to the terror of the situation in the thinly settled country communities. No man can leave his family at night without the dread that some roving Negro ruffian is watching and waiting for this opportunity. The swift punishment which invariably follows these horrible crimes doubtless acts as a deterring effect upon the Negroes in the immediate neighborhood for a short time. But the lesson is not widely learned nor long remembered. Then such crimes, equally atrocious, have happened in quick succession, one in Tennessee, one in Arkansas, and one in Alabama. The facts of the crime appear to appeal more to the Negro's lustful imagination than the facts of the punishment due to his fears. He sets aside all fear of death in any form when opportunity is found for the gratification of his bestial desires. So he wants the white woman so bad that he's willing to risk his life to get some. Come on now. There is small reason to hope for any change for the better. The commission for this crime grows more frequent every year. The generation of Negroes which have grown up since the war have lost in large measure the traditional and wholesome awe of the white race which kept the Negroes in subjection when their masters were in the army. This is them trying to explain why white women weren't being raped when war broke out, which is a lie. And their families were left unprotected except by the slaves themselves. There is no longer a restraint upon the brute's passion of the Negro. What is to be done? The crime of rape is always horrible, but the southern man there is nothing which so fills the soul with horror, loathing, and fury as the outraging of a white woman by a Negro. It is the race question in the ugliest, vilest, most dangerous aspect. The Negro as a political factor can be controlled, but neither laws nor lynching can subdue his lust. Sooner or later, it will force a crisis. We do not know in what form it will come. In its issue of June 4th, the Memphis Evening Scimitar gives the following excuse for lynch law. Aside from the violation of white women by Negroes, which is the outcropping of a bestial perversion of instinct, the chief cause of trouble between the races in the South is the Negro's lack of manners. In the state of slavery, he learned politeness from association with white people who took pains to teach him, which is a lie. Soon, the emancipation came and the tie of mutual interest and regard between master and servant was broken. The Negro has drifted away into a state which is neither freedom nor bondage, lacking the proper inspiration of the one and the restraining force of the other. He has taken up the idea that boorish insolence is independence, and the exercise of a decent degree of breeding towards white people is identical to servile submission. In consequence of the prevalence of this notion, there are many Negroes who use every opportunity to make themselves offensive, particularly when we think it can be done with impunity. We have had too many instances right here in Memphis to doubt this, and our experience is not exceptional. The white people won't stand for this sort of thing, and whether they be insulted as individuals or as a race, the response will be prompt and effectual. The bloody riot of 1866, in which so many Negroes perished, was brought on principally by the outrageous conduct of blacks toward whites on the streets. It is also a remarkable and discouraging fact that the majority of scoundrels are Negroes who have received educational advantages at the hands of white taxpayers. So that propaganda piece right there is, don't send the Negroes to school, don't send the Afro Americans to school, because once they get a little bit of education, that time was paid for by the state, then they get beside themselves. They get a little too uppity. They have got just enough learning to make them realize how hopelessly their race is behind the other in everything that makes a great people, and they attempt to get even by insolence, which is ever the resentment of inferiors. There are well bred Negroes among us, and it is truly unfortunate that they should have to pay, even in part, the penalty of offenses committed by the baser sort. But this is the way of the world. You hear that? So they're saying that, yeah, it's a shame that there are some good black people out there, but they're gonna have to catch these hands just like the baser sort are catching these hands, and the baser sort aren't even actually guilty of the crimes, because more often than not, the white woman wanted to have sex with them or lured them into a situation where they were having sex. The innocent must suffer for the guilty. If the Negroes as a people possessed 100th part of the self respect which is evidenced by the courteous bearing of some that the scimitar could name, the friction between the races would be reduced to a minimum. It will not do to beg to question by pleading that many white men are also stirring up strife. The Caucasian blackguard simply obeys the promptings of a depraved disposition, and he is seldom deliberately rough or offensive towards strangers or unprotected women. All of that they were saying just to cover up the crimes that they were committing. Remember, they accuse us of the things they do. The Negro, the tough, on the contrary, is given to just that kind of offending. He almost invariably singles out white people as his victims. They like, we can have peace if we just be they slaves and shut up. Yeah, if we just shut up and continue to be their slaves and take their sloppy seconds and accept a servile position with no civil rights, no moral rights, no right to education, then we will be able to get along with them. And that's what they were jealous of. That's why they killed so many black people, because these were businessmen. These were these were men that had standing and positions. These weren't just regular people. A coachman has his own transportation business. A furniture guy is not just a carpenter, but he owns the furniture store, you know? On March 9th, 1892, there were lynched in this same city three of the best specimens of young since the war Afro American manhood. They were peaceful, law abiding citizens and energetic businessmen. They believed the problem was to be solved by eschewing politics and putting money in the purse. So they believed in Booker T. Washington's methods. They owned a flourishing grocery business in a thickly populated suburb of Memphis, and a white man named Barrett had one on the opposite corner. After a personal difficulty with Barrett, which Barrett sought by going into the people's grocery store, drawing a pistol, and was thrashed by Calvin McDowell, he, Barrett, threatened to clean him out. These men were a mile beyond the city limits and the police protection. Hearing that Barrett's crowd was coming to attack them Saturday night, they mustered forces and prepared to defend themselves against the attack. When Barrett came, he led a posse of officers. So he had cops with him, 12 in number, who afterwards claimed to be hunting a man for whom they had a warrant. That 12 men in citizens' clothes should think it necessary to go in the night to hunt one man who had never before been arrested or made any record as a criminal has never been explained. When they entered the back door, the young men thought the threatened attack was on and fired into them. Three of the officers were wounded. And when the defending party found out it was officers of the law upon whom they fired, they ceased and got away. So they stopped shooting at cops and ran away. 31 men were arrested and thrown in jail as conspirators, although they all declared more than once that they did not know that they were firing on officers. Excitement was at fever heat until the morning papers, 2 days after, announced that a wounded deputy sheriffs were out of danger. This hindered rather than helped with the plans of the whites. There was no law on the statute books which would execute an Afro American for wounding a white man, but the unwritten law did. Three of these men, the president, the manager, and clerk of the grocery store, the leaders of the conspiracy, were secretly taken from jail and lynched in a shockingly brutal manner. So again, they took the president who knew the business in and out. They took the manager who knew the business in and out, but maybe wasn't as high up as the president because he had more day-to-day runnings, and the clerk who knew the inventory of the store. So they took the they took the brain out, and they just they took the head off and they let the body fall. The Negroes were getting The leaders of the conspiracy were secretly taken from jail and lynched in a shockingly brutal manner. The Negroes are getting too independent, they say. We must teach them a lesson. What lesson? The lesson of subordination. Kill the leaders, and it will cow the Negro who dares to shoot a white man, even in self-defense. Although the race was wild over the outrage, the mockery of law and justice which disarmed men and locked them up in jails where they could be easily and safely reached by the mob, the Afro American ministers, newspapers, and leaders counseled obedience to the law, which did not protect them. So this act scared the people into submission and obedience to the law, which did not protect them. Their counsel was heeded, and not a hand was uplifted to resent the outrage. Following the advice of the free speech, people left the city in great numbers. The dailies and Associated Press reports heralded these men to the country as toughs and Negro desperados who kept a low dive. This same press service printed that the Negro who was lynched in Indianola, Mississippi in May had outraged the sheriff's 8-year-old daughter. The girl was more than 18 years old and was found by her father in the man's room, who was a servant on the place. So they found an 18-year-old grown gal in the room of one of the black servants, and they lynched him. Not content with the misrepresenting of the race, the mob spirit was not to be satisfied until the paper, which was doing all it could to counteract this impression, was silenced. The colored people were resenting their bad treatment in a way to make itself felt, yet gave the mob no excuse for further murder until the appearance of the editorial, which is construed as a reflection on the honor of the Southern white woman. It is not half so libelous as that of the commercial, which appeared 4 days before, and which has been given in these pages. They would have lynched the manager of the free speech for exercising the right of free speech if they had found him as quickly as they would have hung a rapist, and glad of the excuse to do so. The owners were ordered not to return. The free speech was suspended with as little compunction as the business of the People's Grocery, broken up and the proprietors murdered. Chapter 5, The South's Position. We're almost done, guys. I know this has been a longer than expected reading, but we're almost done. Henry W. Grady, in his well-mannered speeches in New England and New York, pictured the Afro-American as incapable of self-government. So they didn't even think we could govern ourselves. Through him and other leading men, the cry of the South to the country has been, hands off, leave us to solve our problem. To the Afro-American, the South says, the white man must and will rule. There is little difference between the antebellum South and the New South. Her white citizens are wedded to any method, however revolting, any measure, however extreme, for subjugation of the young manhood of the race. They have cheated him out of his ballot, deprived him of his civil rights or redress therefore in the civil courts, robbed him of the fruits of his labor, and are still murdering, burning, and lynching him. The result is a growing disregard of human life. Lynch law has spread its insidious influence till men in New York State, Pennsylvania, and on the free Western plains feel they can still take law into their own hands with impunity, especially where the Afro-American is concerned. The South is brutalized to a degree not realized by its own inhabitants and the very foundation of government, law, and order are imperiled. Public sentiment has had a slight reaction, though not sufficient to stop the crusade of lawlessness and lynching. The spirit of Christianity of the great ME Church has aroused to the frequent and revolting crimes against a weak people enough to pass strong condemnatory resolutions at its General Conference in Omaha last May. The spirit of justice of the grand old party, which still exists to this day, asserted itself sufficiently to secure a denunciation of the wrongs and a feeble declaration of the belief in human rights in the Republican platform at Minneapolis. On June 7th, some of the great dailies and weeklies have swung into line declaring that the lynch law must go. The President of the United States issued a proclamation that it will not be tolerated in the territories over which he has jurisdiction. The Governor, Northern, and Chief Justice Bleckley of Georgia have proclaimed against it. The citizens of Chattanooga, Tennessee have set a worthy example in that they not only condemn lynch law, but her public men demanded a trial for Weems, the accused rapist, and guarded him while the trial was in progress. The trial only lasted 10 minutes, and Weems chose to plead guilty and accept a 21-year sentence than to invite the certain death which awaited him outside the cordon of police if he had told the truth and shown the letters he had from the white woman in the case. So Weems was innocent. He had letters from the woman, but he chose to go to jail for 21 years rather than face certain death. Colonel A.S. Collier of Nashville, Tennessee, is so overcome with the horrible state of affairs that he addressed the following earnest letter to the Nashville American. Nothing since I have been a reading man, has so impressed me with the decay of manhood among the people of Tennessee as the dastardly submission to mob reign. We have reached an unprecedented low level. The awful criminal depravity of substituting the mob for the court and jury by giving up the jail keys to the mob whenever they are demanded. We do it in the largest cities and in the country towns. We do it in the midday. We do it after full, not to say formal notice, and so thoroughly and generally that it is acquiesced in that the murderers have discarded the formula of masks. They go into the town where everybody knows them, sometimes under the guise of the government, in the presence of the courts, in the presence of the sheriff and his deputies, in the presence of the entire police force, take out the prisoner, take his life, often with fiendish glee and often with acts of cruelty and barbarism, which impress the reader with a degeneracy rapidly approaching savage life, that the state is disgraced but faintly expresses humiliation, which has settled upon the once proud people of Tennessee. The state in its majesty, through its organized life, for which the people pay liberally, makes but one record, but one note, and that a criminal falsehood was hung by persons to the jury unknown. The murder at Shelbyville is only a verification of what every intelligent man knew would come, because the mob because with a mob, a rumor is as good as proof. These efforts brought the fourth apologies and a short halt, but the lynching mania was raged again through the past 3 months with unabated fury. The strong arm of the law must be brought to bear upon the lynchers in severe punishment, but this cannot and will not be done unless a healthy public sentiment demands and sustains such action. The men and women in the South who disapprove of lynching and yet remain silent upon the perpetuation of such outrages are participants, criminals, accomplices, accessories before and after the fact, equally guilty with the actual lawbreaker who would not persist if they did not know that neither the law nor militia would be employed against them. The forecast says that one of the stories I read was the story of Thomas, her best friend, and they deputized any and every white boy. Some weren't even cops. That's when they killed the president, the manager, and the clerk. Yet the end of the lynch law only took until like 2020 to finally pass to be illegal. And in some places, it's still not illegal. I don't think that lynching has been abolished in all 50 states of the United States. Chapter 6, Self-Help. In the creation of this healthier public sentiment, the Afro American can do for himself what no one else can do for him. The world looks on with wonder that we have conceded so much and remain abiding under such great outrage and provocation. To Northern capital and Afro American labor, the South still owes its rehabilitation. If labor is withdrawn, capital will not remain. The Afro American is thus the backbone of the South. A thorough knowledge and judicious exercise of this power in lynching localities could many times be an effective bloodless revolution. The white man's dollar is his God, and to stop this will be to stop outrages in many localities. The Afro Americans of Memphis denounced the lynching of three of their best citizens and urged and waited for the authorities to act in the matter and bring the lynchers to justice. No attempt was made to do so, and the Black men left the city by the thousands, bringing about great stagnation in every branch of business. Those who remained so injured the business of the streetcar company by staying off the cars that the superintendent, manager, and treasurer called personally on the editor of the Free Speech, asking them to urge our people to give them their patronage once again. Other businessmen became alarmed over the situation of the free speech was run away, that the colored people might be more easily controlled. A meeting of white citizens in June, 3 months after the lynching, passed resolutions for the first time condemning it, but they did not punish the lynchers. Every one of them was known by name because they had been elected to do the dirty work by some of the very citizens who passed these resolutions. Memphis is fast losing her Black population who proclaim as they go that there is no protection for this life and poverty and property of any Afro American citizen in Memphis who is not a slave. So there's no life and property of any Afro American citizen in Memphis who is not a slave. So, as forecast said, shut up and be our slaves is what they want. The Afro American citizens of Kentucky, whose intellectual and financial improvement has been phenomenal, have never had a separate car law until now. Delegations and petitions poured into the legislature against it, yet the bill passed and the Jim Crow car of Kentucky is a legalized institution. Will the great mass of Negroes continue to patronize the railroad? A special from Covington, Kentucky says, Covington, June 13th, the railroads of the state are beginning to feel markedly, very markedly, the effects of a separate coach bill recently passed by the legislature. No class of people in the state have so many and so largely attended excursions as Blacks. All these have been abandoned and the regular travel is reduced to a minimum. A competent authority says the loss of the various railroads will reach $1 million this year. And that's $1 million in 1892, which is closer to 75 million to $100 million in today's money. Greetings, Koku. How are you tonight? A call to the state conference in Lexington, Kentucky last June had delegations from every country in the state. Those delegates, the ministers, teachers, heads of secret and other orders, and the heads of every family should pass word around for every member of the race in Kentucky to stay off the railroads unless obliged to ride. If they did so, and their advice was followed persistently, the convention would not need to petition the legislature to repeal the law or raise money to file a suit. The railroad corporations would be so affected that they would, in self defense, lobby to have the separate car law repealed. On the other hand, as long as the railroads can get Afro American excursions, they will always have plenty of money to fight all the lawsuits brought against them. They will be aided in doing so by the same partisan public sentiment which passed the law. White men passed the law, and white judges and juries will pass upon the suits against the law and render judgment in line with their prejudices and in defense of their greater financial power. So you see how money is the root, how you spend and invest your dollars is always going to dictate the laws you're able to pass. And so at this time, it was railways. Now it's airplanes. We are the ones that spend money on luxury items. If we stop spending those dollars on luxury items, and started circulating those dollars in our communities, there things would change. That's always been true. It was true in 1892 and it's true today. The appeal to the white man's pocket has ever been more effectual than all the appeals ever made to his conscience. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is to be gained by a further sacrifice of manhood and self respect. By the right exercise of his power as the industrial factor of the South, the Afro American can demand and secure his rights, the punishment of lynchers, and a fair trial for accused rapists. Of the many inhuman outrages of this present year, the only case where the proposed lynching did not occur was where the men armed themselves in Jacksonville, Florida, and Paducah, Kentucky, and prevented it. The only times an African American who was assaulted got away has been when he had a gun and used it in self defense. The lesson this teaches, and which every Afro American should ponder well, is that a Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every Black home, and it should be used for the protection which law refuses to give. When the white man, who is also the aggressor, knows he runs at as great a risk of biting the dust every time his Afro American victim does, he will have a greater respect for Afro American life. So when they know they can die too and that we will shoot back, they think twice. The more the Afro American yields and cringes and begs, the more he has to do so, the more he is insulted, the more he is outraged and lynched. The assertion has been substantiated throughout these pages that the press contains unreliable and doctored reports of lynchings. And one of the most necessary things for the race to do is to get out these facts before the public. The people must know before they can act, and there is no educator to compare with the press. The Afro American papers are the only ones which will print the truth, and they lack means to employ agents and detectives to get at the facts. This is why, even today, we're still fighting for a new Black media. The race must rally a mighty host to support to the support of their journals and thus enable them to do much in the way of investigation. A lynching occurred in Port Jarvis, New York, the first week in June. A white and colored man were implicated in the assault upon a white girl. It was charged that the white man paid the colored boy to make the assault, which he did on the public highway in broad daytime and was lynched. This too was done by parties unknown. The white man in the case still lives. He was imprisoned and promises to fight the case on trial. At the preliminary examination, it developed that he had been a suitor of the girl's. She had repulsed and refused him, yet had given him money, and he had sent threatening letters demanding more. The day before this examination, she was so wrought up, she left home and wandered miles away. When found, she said she was so because she was afraid of the man's testimony. Why should she be afraid of the prisoner? Why should she yield to his demands for money if not to prevent him from exposing something he knew? It seems explainable only when the hypotheses that a liaison existed between the colored boy and the girl and the white man knew of it. The press is singularly silent. Has it a motive? We owe it to ourselves to find out. The story comes from Larned, Kansas, October 1st, that a young white lady held at bay until daylight without alarming anyone in the house a burly Negro who entered her room and bed. The burly Negro was promptly lynched without an investigation or examination of inconsistent stories. A house was found burned down near Montgomery, Alabama, in Monroe County on October 13th, just a few weeks ago. Also, the burned bodies of the owners and the melted piles of gold and silver. These discoveries led to the conclusion that the awful crime was not prompted by motives of robbery. The suggestion of the whites was that the brutal lust was the incentive. And as there were nearly 200 Negroes living within a radius of 5 miles of the place, the conclusion was inevitable that some of them were the perpetrators. Upon this suggestion, probably made by the real criminal, the mob acted upon the conclusion and arrested 10 Afro Americans, four of whom they tell the world confessed to the deed of murdering Richard L. Johnson and outraging his daughter Jeanette. These four men, Beryl Jones, Moses Johnson, and Jim and John Packer, none of them 25 years of age, upon this conclusion were taken from the jail, hanged, shot, and burned while yet alive on the night of October 12th. The same report says that Mr. Johnson was on the best terms with his Negro tenants. The race, thus outraged, must find out the facts of this awful hurling of men into eternity on supposition, and give them to the indifferent and apathetic country. We feel this to be a garbled report, but how can we prove it? Near Vicksburg, Mississippi, a murder was committed by a gang of burglars. Of course, it must have been done by Negroes, and Negroes were arrested for it. It is believed that two men, Smith Tooley and John Adams, belonged to a gang controlled by white men, and fearing exposure on the night of July the 4th, they were hanged in the courthouse yard by those interested in silencing them. Robberies since committed in the same vicinity have been known to be by white men who had their faces blackened. We strongly believe in the innocence of these murdered men, but we have no proof. No other news goes out to the world save that which stamps us as a race of cutthroats, robbers, and lustful wild beasts. So great is Southern hate and prejudice. They are legally hung poor little children, 13-year-old poor little child Mildred Brown at Columbia, South Carolina on October 7th on the circumstantial evidence that she poisoned a white infant. If her guilt had been proven unmistakably, had she been white, Mildred Brown would never have been hung. The country would have been aroused and South Carolina disgraced forever for such a crime. The Afro American himself did not know, as he should have known, as his journals should be in a position to have him know and act. Nothing is more definitely settled than he must act for himself. I have shown how he may employ the boycott, immigration, and the press. I feel that by a combination of these agencies can be effectually stamped out the Lynch law, that last relic of barbarism and slavery. The gods help those who help themselves. The end. So as you can see, Ida B. Wells had the goods. She had the stories behind the stories. She was in a position to tell the tale and to get to the heart of the matter. Forecast wants to come up for a minute. You absolutely can come up. I put the link in the chat. Anyone else that wants to come up can come up to comment on it. But we got to learn that white women, white woman's virtue has always been protected. And white women's virtue is something that they hold dear. They have killed many a black man for it. They have sent many a black man to prison for it. And you cannot tell me that all of these black men wanted and lusted after white women so much that they were willing to risk their lives just to get it. Greetings, Forecast. How are you tonight?
Hey, how you doing, Matron?
I'm good.
Yeah, thank you for reading this. I don't want to be long. I know this was a little bit longer than usual, but thank you for reading this one, though. I appreciate it. Um, Yeah, the first thing, like, the last line, the gods help those who help themselves. But one thing about Ida B. Wells, you notice in this book, and it's disrespectful because they try to call her a feminist, but she was the first one to kind of point out, like, yo, hold on, these white girls is out here lying, you know what I'm saying? Like, and to actually put it out there, and how she would go to actually places, and even what happened in Memphis where they burnt her house down and her printing press and all of that stuff. And she went out there to do it anyway. And um and they and they try to call her a feminist, but she was the first one to do that. And this book really is about, like, not just about how they be lying, but they know that the white girls is lying, but it's more about economics. That's the whole purpose, because
Mhm.
the whole purpose is to stop black people from doing stuff. And she was kind of right, because this was before Plessy versus Ferguson. And when she was talking about boycotting, and the train company is the one that actually did the lawsuit, not even black people. It was the train company, because they was like, having a separate cart for black people was too much. And then they got the mulatto dude, who was a white dude, who they thought was gonna pass it, but they was like, no, you got to drop a black blood. So then they came with Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, and all of that stuff. And um and then she was right about some of the other stuff, because like, one of the last parts you read, it was like, I know in Chicago, like, they was like, they had, you can't prove it or whatever, when she was talking about her own media. But like, black people was telling me, like, even some of the stuff that was going on in Chicago, it was like people putting on, like, oh yeah, when she was like, people putting on blackface and doing crimes, people
Mhm.
said they put on masks. And like, that's what people in Chicago told me. Like, but this was like 2019 though. When they was, because they stopped talking about it now they got it for the immigrants. But and the last thing, I know you probably got other things, but like, one thing in the rotation, can I like request one more?
You absolutely can request one more.
Either the red record, which is like, that one is more like statistics and the causes of lynchings, like, where she like kind of went through every lynching, like, she really went every place and documented every lynching and the cause of the lynching, and then talked about the causes, and then like the solutions. And then there's another one, but that one is more, I guess you would say, positive, called Mob Rule in New Orleans. Is about Robert Charles, who like, he ended up, you know offering like 15 white people, shooting like 20 some people, because they was trying to profile him, but she documented it. But that's more positive than the other one. But yeah, thank you for reading this book. And I want to say that.
Well, thank you for coming up. I always appreciate the feedback that you have. I want to say greetings to Anthony McPhail and greetings to everyone in the chat. I always appreciate you, but like you said, it was more about economics. They were lynching black men that were successful. They were lynching black men that had relationships with white women because the white women would lie. Um, and we have to get to the point where we control our economics. Now, in this service economy, it's a little bit different, but we can still maintain how we spend our dollars. We can decide, we can direct the dollars that we spend, because if we directed our dollars away from all these luxury items and actually patronized small black businesses that were for the cause, then they would feel that too, you know?
Yeah, I agree with that. Her solutions is spot on even for now. She was like, that's the non-bloody revolution. But then, also there should be a special place for, like, a shotgun in every home. She said the only places where there haven't been lynchings is where the Negroes was armed and then let it go down. And
Hmm.
and also she brought up a couple times where Negroes was about to go lynch a white boy for doing something to a black girl. But how could she be a feminist when she's pointing out like what white girls do and the opposite? And she spoke up for like black women. But I don't know about, she was spoke up for black men right there. So
Well, they try really hard to rewrite our heroes, our true heroes, and our true legends to fit their narrative. And you can rewrite anyone to fit the narrative that you want, that you want, because the teacher frames the question in a certain way, and next thing you know, excuse me, they're explaining it and with these feminist eyes and these pro femininity and pro woman, and not understanding that no, she criticized white women for doing the things that they did to black men. No, she stood up for black men. No, she wasn't talking about toxic masculinity and things of that nature. So,
Yeah, yeah, all facts, and I think I appreciate you for reading this one. This was a great reading, and especially with all the feedback, So I appreciate it.
well, I appreciate you for being here. Did you have anything else you wanted to say tonight? Because, like I said, it's been long, and so I try not to hold you guys too long, but I was trying to get it out.
Oh no, no, I'm glad you did. I appreciate it. I was, so I appreciate that. I got that one here, but no, just thank you. I appreciate it, and yeah, shouts out to you. Thank you.
Well, shouts out to you, and thank you. I want to say thank you to Oni from the Pro Black Perspective. Thank you to the Forecast. Thank you to Brother Bakari. Thank you to Anthony McPhail. Thanks, Coco from the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I appreciate each and every one of you for listening tonight. I know that Sister Raw is listening with the elders. I know that Afro Native is listening. I know that Dorico Cooper is listening. I know that Tinkerbell 87 is listening. I know that the leadership at Jesse's Kids Academy are listening. I know that the leadership at the Daycare Ladies Network are listening. So I thank each and every one of you for listening tonight. I value each and every one of you for the support that you give me, and I will see you tomorrow. We will be reading Negro Pilgrimage in America by C. Eric Lincoln next. And then I'm going to look for those books that the Forecast has requested, because you can always request a book either live online or in the comments. So I thank each and every one of you for being here tonight, and I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Peace, guys.